Hi, I'm Phil. This is Phil with Facts, and today we're talking about secondary fermentation. Recently I started several brews, and I started them in several fermentation vessels, be it a bucket, a carboy, a wide mouth carboy, and today we're going to look at how to put them from primary into secondary, when to do that, what are the benefits, and much more. So stay with me, and let's get this started. So the first brew I have here is my cherry chocolate blend. The first thing you're going to notice is that there's no pressure. With a bucket, sometimes you don't have pressure just because the seals aren't all that good. But neutral pressure is usually a good indication that fermentation has run its course through. So when moving a fermentation from primary to secondary, there's certain things you want to be aware of. Has it fermented through? Is it done? Are there still active yeast? How long has it been fermenting? And that kind of stuff. It's also a good time to say, I'm going to sample my stuff and find out if there's anything I want to put in secondary. So we're going to open the lid. What do we got here? Okay, so I'm going to show you guys what this looks like. And a few things right off the bat. A, it started to clear out real nicely. And from the smell of it, I definitely smell alcohol, and I definitely smell some of the gases. Now, because it's a blend, there's still going to be curds, and there's still going to be milk solids in here. It might look a little bit like mold, but that's actually not what we're looking at. We're actually looking at whey and that kind of stuff. But we can really see right to the bottom, so I'm going to get this to an elevated platform. Now, there's really no way around it, especially with, I want to say especially with blend, but no matter what you're moving from one vessel to the other, your best bet is to have an auto siphon. They're not expensive. They get the job done very well. They have this little cap on the end, so you can control how much sediment you want to get into it, unless of course it overtakes the entire bottom, in which case you're going to get sediment either way. And usually when racking from primary to secondary, you are going to get sediment. It's just the way it is. That's one of the reasons you have secondary as an option. Now, everything that is going to touch my brews today has been sanitized. I use Star San for mine, but you can use any food grade safe sanitizer while doing this. You want to get it started. And now, you want to keep a close eye on this and make sure that A, the liquid doesn't go underneath and break the siphon, or that you drop this all the way to the bottom and get all the sediment that you were trying to kind of avoid. So I'm going to let this fill up, and then I'll be back. Alright, and once the siphon is finished, there's still some things you want to do. Now, typically with a mead or a wine, which has a lot less sediment in the bucket, I'll take a reading beforehand to see if it dried out or if it's the reading I want. With blend, a lot of times I do it after I rack it, because it clears a lot faster than a mead does. And I don't want to have to worry about getting all the extra cheese curds and stuff in here, making it harder for me to have a reading. So I try to avoid that. You'll notice that this is no longer as clear as it was in the bucket. That's because we got some sediment. There was some sacrifice made. It really comes down to how much volume you really want compared to how much is left in the bucket. Now, what's left in the bucket is primarily fermented cheese curd. And if you take the time, you can make a cheese out of this, and it's going to be a little sweeter, it's going to be alcoholic, it's going to be really tasty, and it'll pair really well with the blend you made. But that's a different video, and we don't have time for that today. So let's just quickly take a reading. I will say blend will never be completely dry. And it's nothing to do with the yeast, and it's nothing to do with the sugars you added. Milk naturally has lactose in it. Lactose is a non-fermentable sugar. Ergo, there'll always be some residual sweetness in your in your blend. Okay. Generally, you don't want to do what I did and make a whole bunch of foam. It looks like we have a 1.020. This is why I love sticky notes. We're going to calculate what that means, and I'll put it right down here. Next thing we're going to do, pour off a little sample. As I always say, we went through all the trouble to make the brew. We're going to need to try the brew. Also, in secondary, you could add things. You could add extra fruit. You could add spices. There's a whole bunch of stuff that will mellow. And as this thing ages in secondary, it does gain all those extra flavors or whatever you want. This is also where it's going to clear. It's going to degas naturally and get ready to be bottled. Now, my best guess is this is done. It's at a reasonable gravity. It was clearing out. There shouldn't be any more fermentation or anything like that. But there will be degassing happening. So we are going to put an airlock back on. So as it clears and gets ready to be bottled, any extra gases that want to escape can, and we don't accidentally make a bomb. Although the bomb part of it really shouldn't be an issue at this point, but it won't degas if the gas has nowhere to go. Alright, next brew. Alright, the next brew we're going to be working with for secondary is our strawberry and cream blend. And as you'll see, strawberries are all floating on top. They're pretty much submerged. They forced a lot of sediment up, and they have a nice yeast cake at the bottom. So, the only issue with this brew, and it's something I wish I would have thought about when I first started it, and something you should probably think about when you're brewing. You're always going to have waste. So you're always going to have less liquid in this vessel than in this vessel. But you don't want a ton of headroom. So this one might get bottled a little bit quicker than the other ones, which means I might just wait for it to clear out and then bottle it, just to avoid any oxidation or anything like that. It should be high enough in ABV that I don't have to worry about acetobacters getting in, but oxygenation is still a thing and can change the overall flavor and quality of the brew over time. Not much I could do about it now, and unfortunately, I don't have any vessels smaller than this that are good for fermentation. So we're going to see what we get. Now, everything was cleaned and sanitized yet again in between the first brew and the second brew. You want to make sure you do that because you don't want any cross-contamination. If something, God forbid, happened to my first brew, where at some point it got infected or something was growing in it and I'm not aware of that yet, if all this stuff touches that brew and then I immediately shove it into this brew, I just ruined 2 brews. So you don't want to do that. We're going to stick this in, get below the strawberry cap. The good thing with glass jars as opposed to buckets is I can see exactly where this is. I'm not sure if this would help. I'm not sure if this is going to help, but I could shine a light and I can see right through to the other side, which is amazing. But I can see exactly where my auto siphon is, which is about halfway right now, which is perfect because it won't upset anything. Yeah, so as you can see, it finished through, it siphoned through, and there's still just a lot of headroom. So again, what that means is I'll probably put the lid on here today. I'll probably let it sit for maybe a week or two at max, just let it start to degas and clear out, and then I'll bottle it before it's done degassing, because that's a lot of headroom. That's going to be a lot of oxygen that could potentially get in there, and we want to try to avoid that. With that said, let's take a reading and see what it ended up at. Alright, just like the other brew, it looks like it's ending at a 1.020. Again, it's still a blend, it's still lactose, so it's never going to be fully dry. With this one, I thought I'd want to sweeten it with a little bit more lactose. So when we take the sample, we'll figure out if that's what we want to do. And yeah, I will be trying all these samples at the end. Just because I put a lid on a carboy doesn't mean I can't take the lid off and throw something else into it. I'm going to put the lid on. I think going forward, my new rule is going to be, if I'm making a blend, it's going to start in a bucket and then go to a carboy, opposed to starting in a carboy and having nowhere to go after that. However, let's go on to brew number 3. Alright, and our third and final brew today is going to be our T1. Now, it's still showing positive pressure. That doesn't mean it's still fermenting. It just means there's still gases in it. It's starting to clear already. I don't see any visible signs inside the vessel of fermentation. There's no bubbles coming up it. So, since this is a wine, and since it's not clear yet and I don't have to worry about any sediment or anything, we're going to start with the reading this time and see where we're at. Which is just a good way to know. The smell already is significantly different than the blends were. Alright. And you know what? After looking at the reading, I'm pretty sure this isn't done yet. So this happens sometimes. Sometimes you let it go 3 or 4 weeks and it still looks like it might be working. So what we're going to do, instead of putting this in secondary, I'm going to use this as a great learning example. I'm going to show you how to keep primary going, or even speed it up if you kind of need to. We're going to start by adding the sample back. And you want to do this somewhat carefully, even though I'm about to contradict myself in a second anyway. So, as I said before, you don't want to introduce a whole bunch of oxygen into your brew. It's just not good for the brew itself. It can oxygenate it. It could create acetobacters, which would then turn it into vinegar. However, sometimes, especially when you start getting a gravity around 13-14%, which is normally what I aim for my meads, my blends, and some of my wines, what happens is the yeast start to slow down because there's so much gas in here, there's so much of their own waste in here. They don't want to do their job anymore, they don't want to eat anymore. So what we're going to do is take the whole vessel, give it a good swirl, like a nice shake. And now carefully, well, before anything else, you see all that foam? That's all gas that's now coming out of here. And you heard that pop? So now we just let all that gas out. You can try it again, give it another good swirl. I know based on the sugars I put in here and the type of yeast I used that it should be able to go and eat through completely dry. If it stalls a few points before that, that's fine. But at the moment, this is going to be sickeningly sweet and not really drinkable. So we're going to swirl it. We're going to put the airlock back on. And I'm going to give this another week or two and then take another reading, see where it is. You don't have to time these things perfectly. If a month goes by and it's still working, let it work. If after 2 weeks it looks like nothing's happening and you have neutral pressure, test it. It might be stalled. There might be an issue. Maybe the yeast wasn't good. Maybe primary fermentation never took off. Keep an eye on your brews. You don't have to babysit them. You don't have to stare at them constantly. But taking readings every once in a while does help. Taking a peek at it every once in a while just to see what it's doing. The signs of a healthy brew would be you have your croissant line, you have bubbles coming up the side, your bubbler itself is bubbling every once in a while. The speed doesn't really matter. It's going to produce gas at its own rate and they're going to escape at their own rate, but you want to make sure. Now, this went about 3/4 of the way. If I had to guess, we're probably looking around 9% right now. I know it can go a little bit higher than that. So, as I said, not a big deal. I'm not going to put this into secondary because all I would do at the moment is if I tried to siphon this into here, I would break up the yeast colony, potentially stalling it or making it have to start all over again and build a whole new colony. And all I would do is make a rougher fermentation. I'd be harder on the yeast, which might create off flavors. And I wouldn't be doing myself or my brew any favors by rushing it and throwing it into secondary. So we won't. However, now's a good time to get back to the blends. Alright, so I have 2 blends here. I have my strawberry and cream blend, and I have my chocolate cherry blend. At this point, I want to taste them. I want to see, are they sweet enough? Do I want to add more sweetness to it? Other thing to my say is, are there any flavors coming out? Now, blend tends to be drank young. So, if I'm not getting strawberry now, I'm probably not going to get strawberry later on. And I'd want to add more strawberry to it. Or, in this case, maybe the cherry isn't coming through. Or maybe I want to add a spice to it, which might be a thing, to just give it a little oomph. Really, in secondary, you could add nothing, because really all we want to do is degas and clarify. That is it. And it'll do both those things on its own with just a little bit of time. But let's try. Also, these are about a month old. I'm not expecting them to be great at the moment, although they smell great. The way blend smells just continues to surprise me. Like, it's such a unique flavor, but it's very wine-like, but in the weirdest way, but also in a great way. It's very hard to explain. Okay. Alright, first thoughts. It tastes like a very fruity white wine. It's really good. The strawberry definitely comes through, and I get those very almost fresh, vibrant strawberries. It's not that sweet, but there is a sweetness to it. I don't know. I'm not going to add extra lactose today. I'm going to let this to clarify. I'm going to give it another week or so, maybe 2 weeks, and try it again. And then I'll see if I want it to be sweeter. The sweetness level isn't going to change. But I'm just curious to see if the strawberries keep popping out in a couple weeks. Or, because right now, I know they're strawberry. I smell it, I taste it. It's actually wonderful. Like, if I bottled this right now, or if somebody bottled this right now and made me try that glass, I wouldn't know it was a month old. I would never guess. It wouldn't even faze me. Okay. Let's try cherry chocolate. Oh wow, right up the nose at the beginning, just from the cocoa nibs, I definitely smell like a rich chocolatey note to it. I'm not getting the cherry, but we'll see. Oh wow. So here's what's happening with this one. You, right off the bat, get that chocolatey mouthfeel. Perfect. The cherry comes through right towards the tail end. The chocolate hides the sweetness. So I'm thinking here's what we're gonna do. Okay. I think I figured out what I want to do with this one. And secondary fermentation is gonna be the perfect time for this. Side note, I keep saying secondary fermentation. No fermentation really happens in secondary. You broke up the yeast colony at the very least, so they stalled. They're going to drop out of suspension if they're even still in suspension. If they did start again, it wouldn't be much. So you don't really see much change in gravity when you put something from primary into secondary. If you see a large change in gravity, you probably went too fast and the yeast weren't done with the brew when you swapped them over. Now, the reason why we taste our brew at this point, as I said, discerning to our nose. So I'm curious if sweetness would help this one. So I'm going to add a half teaspoon of lactose. Like, not even a lot. I'm going to start with this chopstick just to break it up, make sure I get it. And I want to see if the added sweetness does anything to here. It's a good way to test it. And right off the bat, yeah. So I think the bitter notes from the cocoa nibs are playing tug of war with the sweetness of the berries. So I think a little bit more sweetness will help those berries really shine through while leaving the chocolatey flavors there. Now, I love chocolate. I love mixing chocolate with other flavors. So I debated for a good 6 or 7 minutes. Do I want to put a cinnamon stick in here, or do I want to put a couple of coffee beans or some instant coffee powder in here? Because coffee and cinnamon are both really good enhancers of a chocolatey flavor. I'm going to go with cinnamon today, because I think cinnamon's also going to go really well with the cherry. So we're going to add 1 cinnamon stick right in. We're going to add, I'm thinking about 1.5 tablespoons of lactose, which isn't as sweet as sugar, so it's not as much sugar as you think. It also is not fermentable, so it's not going to start anything back up. But I think it's a good starting note. And I 100% didn't spill it all over the place, I promise. We're going to give this a good stir. And watch all those gases that are still in here start to push out the airlock. Any oxygen that got in is now out. I'm not worried about that. I want to mix up the lactose a little bit so it's actually in here, but on its own it should be fine. We'll taste it again before we bottle it, and if I want it sweeter at that point, we can. But it's a good starting point. Because again, you don't want to add too much sugar. You don't want it to be so sickeningly sweet that you can't drink it. You want to be able to taste the flavors. You put a lot of work into a brew. You want to appreciate the nuances of the brew as you do it. I also want to say that either one of these could pass as a mead, color-wise, in my head. Because they both look very much mead colors. As much as I'm digging this one, I think the cinnamon stick is going to give it a world of extra flavor and like a nice little punch. But this one, thinking about it, this one I wish I would have made a bigger batch, because that's not going to last in this house very long once I bottle it. But okay, I will see you guys at the final facts. And welcome to the final facts. I had a lot of fun with this particular video. I liked just the flow of it, being able to talk about secondary and when to do it and why to do it. It's all part of the learning process of brewing. The more you brew, the more familiar you get with what to look for, what signs you want. And as you get more familiar, you then start to figure out things like, this is what I want from secondary. This is what I want from primary. Primary fermentation should be all of the fermentation. From making your must, to add in the yeast, to them eating all of the sugar that they're going to eat. Now, if you calculate it and you want it to be a sweeter brew, you make sure it's a sweeter brew. Just know what gravity you're kind of looking for at the end. Like, as I said, today we did mostly blends, and I know that blends are never going to go dry. They're never going to be 1.000 or lower. Just because there is lactose in there, it's not going to ferment out. So, there is that. With mead, a lot of times I like that to stop a little bit sweeter, or I back sweeten it. Because if there isn't a honey prominent flavor in mead, why are you making mead? And with wines, I tend to let those go dry. Like, I want them to stop at 1.000, so I add the appropriate amount of sugar to that to make them stop dry. It's all about your personal preferences and what you want it to come. But once primary fermentation is done, once the yeast have done all of the work they're going to do, then you put it into secondary. Secondary, again, you want it to clarify. So you want it to clear out, you want everything to drop out of suspension, you want the gases that are naturally in it to start to leave the brew. Once you bottle it, the way you bottle it is more or less the way you're going to get it. So if you bottle it with a whole bunch of gas still in it, it's going to keep those flavors. It's going to retain that, and it might not be the best. You can decant your meads, you can decant your wines, and that will let any extra gas that's in it out. But I like to bottle it as still as possible. It's just my practice, and that's how I've always done it. The next step after secondary fermentation is bottling, which we will probably be doing sooner rather than later, because that strawberry blend, I don't want to sit with that much headroom for too long. So we're going to see what happens with that. But guys, this has been a great video. Thank you so much. Please leave me a comment with any questions, comments, or concerns. Hit that like button, it really helps me out. Subscribe, that's amazing. But guys, until next time, I'm Phil. This is Phil with Facts, and cheers.